Hello, friends, and welcome back to ABN's Trinity channel for another episode of Colliding Worldviews. Today is Monday, May 7th, in the year of our Lord, 2018. And as always, it's a blessing to have you joining me from around the world via high-speed internet, also through satellites to the Middle East, North Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. And if you have a mobile device, if you have Amazon Fire Stick, if you have Roku, if you have Apple TV, and a number of other devices, you can actually watch this as well as all the other weekly shows live on the go from your device. Just download the 100% free ABN Sat app on your device, and you can either watch the video or you can listen to the show, even if you can't watch the video, but you are able to get this show as well as the other shows live. We thank you for your financial support, which allows these vital shows to continue and to be broadcast throughout the world. Very, very expensive to do that, about $10,000 per month for each satellite signal that's going throughout the world. And of course, we'd love to have more satellite signals. We'd like to be on more platforms than we are currently. So thank you for your financial support, which helps that continue, as well as your prayers, praying for the Lord Jesus Christ to be exalted throughout the world, for the gospel to go out into all the world, just as Jesus told his disciples to go and share. And we today are still sharing that gospel as well. And it's always a blessing to have you joining me here on Colliding Worldviews. And today, we're doing a topic that is unique in that it's, as far as I know, never been talked about here on the Trinity channel before. And this is a topic that you won't really hear too much in general. A lot of people are not informed about this topic. So very unique show, and I hope that all of you enjoy it and all the information that you will receive today, because it is vital information, as usual, to have and to share with other people. And joining me today is Stephanie Potts, and we're here, and she's here to talk about why the New Age is radicalizing Native American spirituality. So very unique show, and again, very interesting topic for a lot of people out there, especially people who have many Native Americans around them. But Stephanie's been here on the Trinity channel before. For those of you who do not know who she is a missionary with Haven Ministries out of Denver, Colorado. She worked with the federal government for 15 years and joined Haven Ministries in 2015. She received her bachelor's degree from Florida State University in political science and international relations, and received her master's degree in geographic information systems from Penn State University. She specializes in evangelizing to Muslims and, again, Native Americans. Why, it's a blessing to have her here. Stephanie, welcome back to ABN's Trinity channel.
Thanks, Tony. Thank you for having me on.
I've been excited for this show. This, again, is a topic that we haven't talked about before, and this is 1 hour that we can use to equip people on this topic. What is the New Age movement, and what do they believe?
Okay, well, the New Age movement arose in the 1970s and 80s, and it's an extremely eclectic conglomeration of different beliefs and practices that includes things like channeling, crystal healing, new versions of shamanism, and a variety of therapies and techniques designed to transform the individual into a higher state of consciousness. It borrows from and it synthesizes a lot of different views, including Gnosticism, Eastern spirituality, and New Thought. The movement as a whole actually optimistically presumes that the world has entered or is on the verge of entering a new age of unprecedented spiritual possibilities. It's also sometimes referred to as the Age of Aquarius. My friend Marsha Montenegro, she has this great ministry called Christian Answers for the New Age, and she has a ton of information on her website. And some of the information that she provides on what these folks believe include things like man is innately divine, God is only a principle, Jesus was just a man who reached his Christ consciousness, which means he realized his true divine nature or his God consciousness, and that sin isn't what we think it is as Christians. It's not realizing your true divine nature. And illnesses are brought on by wrong views and beliefs. And in fact, logic and rational thinking are actually inhibitors to knowledge and truth.
And Marcia is definitely a great resource for people to go to find more information on the New Age. And Stephanie, you as an expert on Native Americans and their movement and how that ties into the New Age, a lot of people don't think about this. I mean, many people are familiar with Native Americans, and they just look at them as a racial group, quote unquote, or a particular ethnic group, but they don't really think about what their spiritual or religious beliefs are. And of course, you talking there about how looking to Jesus as this enlightened person or a good teacher, a common belief amongst many religious groups out there, or spiritual groups, quote unquote, of course, is wrong. He was much more than that. And one more reminder that we need to get the gospel to Native Americans as well. Don't feel that their culture or their Native Americanness, and whatever that entails, can actually keep them from the gospel. They need that just like everybody else. Of course, there are some walls there, though, just like there are walls that people have because of their spirituality. This could be a wall with Native Americans as well. But again, still people in need of the gospel. And when we talk about the New Age movement and whether it ties to, however it ties to the Native American population or their, in general, spiritual beliefs, do you consider the New Age movement an apocalyptic cult?
Well, that's a really good question. Let's first explain what an apocalyptic cult is and what they believe. It's a belief that the end of the world is imminent. And people associated with these types of cults often believe that the new heaven or the new earth will replace the old one, that's also called millenarianism. So among new religions that were birthed in the United States in the mid-19th century were Seventh-day Adventists and Jehovah's Witnesses. Both of these groups were products of millenarian fervor set off by William Miller. Another thing to keep in mind is that apocalyptic cults vary from the extreme death cults like ISIS and the Branch Davidians to less extreme groups like Share International. And Share International, they believe that the Buddhist one world teacher, or what they call the Maitreya, has arrived or is about to arrive, and that we shouldn't worry about nuclear war with Iran or Russia because we're entering into a new age of consciousness, and people who refuse to be in touch with their inner divinity need to die off anyway.
Wow. And this is information that people definitely need to have. Of course, just like every other group out there, racial group, religious group, whatever, there are particular parts of the U.S. or of the world where you will see Native Americans in higher concentrations than others. So this is definitely a show very important for people who are surrounded by them or have a higher population or amount of people than another place, but very informative in the sense that everyone needs to be prepared to speak to a Native American who has this type of religious belief, even if you come in contact with one. I mean, in your entire lifetime, being an apologist and being prepared to give a defense for the hope that lies within you many times includes being somewhat, at least, familiar with what people believe and why. It doesn't matter if they are Muslims, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, or if we look here to the New Age or Native Americans in particular. You talk about this apocalyptic cult, quote unquote, term. Are there apocalyptic cults within Native American communities in particular?
Well, I'm going to step back for a second and give you a little history. Native American apocalyptic cults before the 19th century were focused primarily on returning to traditional Native ways of life and getting away from the white man way of doing things. However, by the late 19th century, the buffalo, which was a sacred animal and the primary source of food for Native Americans, was almost extinct as a result of rapacious behavior of European settlers at the time in the West. So as a result of this, apocalyptic cults culminated into what was called the ghost dance movement of the late 19th century. And the ghost dance movement was actually a response to this catastrophe of the buffalo almost being completely annihilated, and was meant as a source of hope by its founder. And the founder's name was Wovoka of the Paiute tribe. So there's actually a very comprehensive late 19th century study on the ghost dance movement that was done by a gentleman named James Mooney of the Smithsonian Institution. His research says that the cult represented an attempt of Indians in the western United States to rehabilitate traditional cultures. So I want to take a second here to explain exactly what Native Americans believe. They are panentheists, not pantheists, but panentheists, which means that they believe that God, or what they call the Great Spirit or the Creator, actually permeates everything from the water to the mountains, to the sky, to the stars, to animals and humans. Everything contains God within it, including us. That's what they believe. So the ghost dance movement arose from this Northern Paiute prophet dreamer named Wovoka, and he lived in Western Nevada, and he announced that it was the imminent return of the dead, hence this ghost dance. And Wovoka actually received this revelation from this great spirit while under an altered state of consciousness. And he himself had actually induced this altered state of consciousness during the solar eclipse of 1889. And the prophecy that Wovoka received stated that the Indian race, living or dead, would soon be reunited upon a regenerated earth to live life in aboriginal happiness, forever free from death, disease, and misery. And within this study, Mooney compares this cult to that of the whirling dervishes of Sufi Islam. Both Native Americans and Sufis actually dance in circles for hours and hours and hours on end in order to leave their earthly consciousness and to travel into a spirit world to gain esoteric or secret knowledge, power, and to learn how to tap into their inner divine nature. Do you have the video that I sent you? Maybe we can show this video. It's from the Library of Congress, and it's actually footage from 1894 of a ghost dance performed by the Sioux Indians at Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. I thought that was a fascinating video that they actually were able to catch. So they're wearing their ghost dance garments at the time here. And what would often happen, however, is that many of these dancers associated with the ghost dance movement fell into trances and received new songs from the dead. They met these folks, or these dead folks, in visions that were induced during these dances, and some folks even were supposedly healed just by performing this dance. Now, the concern I have is that this intense physiological activity, which causes apoplexy, is unfortunately a common theme amongst cults. People can be easily brainwashed or influenced by spirits during these events. Wovoka was even told by the spirits to have his men wear special garments that would be impenetrable by arrowheads and bullets, but they weren't. And when the U.S. government went in during the Battle of Wounded Knee, a lot of people died because they thought that these garments that the spirits told Wovoka to wear and all his men to wear were certainly not successful in preventing the arrowheads and the bullets and stuff from penetrating their body. So although originally a peaceful religion calling for coexistence with the whites, several years of this prophecy by Wovoka and the spirits that gave him this prophecy, several years of this not coming true led to the radicalization of the ghost dance doctrine by the Lakota Sioux. And by 1890, it became a death cult. They were so fed up with things that they called for the extermination of all Europeans. And this caused obviously a lot of paranoia within the United States government and the subsequent Wounded Knee massacre. Um, it was very unfortunate because it was originally a peaceful religion.
Now, we have other pictures that you gave us as well, so just let the technician know when you'd like to show those. But is this ghost dance movement still relevant to Native Americans today?
Well, that's a really good question, Tony. Today, the ghost dance is no longer performed, except possibly clandestinely. I think the last time it was performed was in the 1970s. But the ideology of this movement certainly remains active in the hearts and minds of Native Americans, and especially the Lakota Sioux. And we saw the embodiment of this ideology in the Standing Rock protests. And if you want to bring up a picture of Chase Iron Eyes, I don't know if you can pull that up, but in December, there he is. In December of 2016, Chase Iron Eyes, who is a former congressional candidate and member of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, said that the Standing Rock demonstration was not over, and actually called the demonstration Our Ghost Dance. So yeah, it's obviously very much still a part of their life. And so they look at things like the 2016 election of Donald Trump as a huge blow to their culture and their spirituality. And the Lakota Sioux especially really resent Donald Trump's embrace of oil and gas and things that they perceive as being against the environmental movement. And actually, according to Rosalind Lapierre of Harvard Divinity School, historically, indigenous peoples use the natural seasonal cycles of weather, plants, animals as part of their liturgical or religious calendar. So when the U.S. government made certain Native American religious practices illegal in the late 19th century and early 20th century, although these policies have been rescinded, they did lead to some significant changes in indigenous religious practices. So today, Native Americans feel the environmental changes that are occurring as a result of things like climate change have forced them to modify their religious rituals in the way that they do things because it's changing the cyclical cycles. And it is becoming a crisis, in their opinion, of apocalyptic proportions, hence this apocalyptic cult. And furthermore, Trump's embrace, again, of this oil and gas industry and the approval of the Dakota Access Pipeline and the rollback of the federal land protection for Bears Ears National Monument and Grand Staircase Escalante, this is seen as just another attempt by the U.S. government to prevent Native Americans from practicing their religion. And if you can pull up the picture of Chief Avril Looking Horse, I think what he's had to say about this is very telling. There he is. This is a picture of him at the Parliament of World Religions in September of 2017. He wrote an article in Indian Country Today where, well, let me give you a little background on him. He is the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota Nations chief, and he published this apocalyptic warning about the impact America is making on Mother Earth. So in this article, he says, look around you. Mother Earth is very ill from these violations, and we are on the brink of destroying the possibility of a healthy and nurturing survival for generations to come, our children's children. In our prophecies, it is told that we are now at the crossroads, either unite spiritually as a global nation or be faced with chaos, disasters, diseases, and tears from our relatives' eyes. I ask you to join me on this endeavor. Our vision is for the peoples of all continents, regardless of their beliefs in the Creator, to come together as one sacred nation, to pray at their sacred sites, meditate and commune with one another, thus promoting an energy shift to heal Mother Earth and achieve a universal consciousness towards attaining peace. It's pretty interesting.
And definitely for a lot of people out there, not even taking into account how all these different things tie together. People hear about pantheism or panentheism, again, believing that all is God or that God is in everything. And of course, you don't have to be a Native American to believe that, but it's no surprise that Native Americans, or at least not all, you have to ask them what they individually believe, but for a whole, to have this spirituality that has been passed on generation after generation, to have this panentheistic view of God being in everything. No surprise there. When we look at this ghost dance and this form of spirituality, which is just another flavor, just another distraction from the truth, and of course has very deep roots being tied into an ethnic group in particular. We also have a picture here of the ghost dance dress, and this is the type of dress that was worn in that video that we played, correct?
That's right. And these were the dresses that they thought would be impenetrable by bullets and arrows, but unfortunately weren't, and ended up leading to so many Sioux Indians dying during the Wounded Knee massacre. Are we able to pull up the picture?
Here, yeah, we should have it here. And please explain these three different pictures that are on here.
Okay, so the one that looks like, I'm looking at things through my computer, but the tan one is an Arapaho dress, and the two other ones are the Sioux dress. So it wasn't just Lakota Sioux, obviously, who performed this. This was an attempt to unite Indians from all the different nations against the white man, against the encroaching and rapacious behavior of European settlers who were destroying their source of food, who were destroying the sacred buffalo. But unfortunately, these didn't work. But it was an attempt to try to unite all the different nations together.
Now, this particular practice or tactic aside of this particular dress and this dance, the statement that you had said, either unite spiritually as a global nation or be faced with chaos, quote unquote, is of course a startling statement. Do you think Chief Looking Horse's message is successfully reaching people today?
Oh, most definitely. Now, back in the 19th century, the focus was on the total disregard for the conservation of the sacred buffalo by European settlers. However, by the mid-20th century, as more people began to embrace Native spirituality as their personal path, the ghost dance began to appeal to the counterculture movement. It moved beyond this conservationist focus and actually became a symbol of rebellion against the U.S. government and its environmental policies. And many people today are unfortunately leaving the fundamental elements of the Abrahamic religions and are embracing the occult. Actually, about a quarter of U.S. adults, or 27%, now say that they think of themselves as spiritual but not religious, which is actually up 8 percentage points in the past 5 years, according to a 2016 Pew Research Center survey.
And what is the primary focus or goal of these Native American apocalyptic cults?
Well, I'm glad that you asked that, Tony. Many of these spiritual people, quote unquote spiritual people, consider the Native American faith as their personal path to God. However, in the New Age movement, there are a lot of different paths to God, and no one path is right or wrong. Yet there's this common theme within this New Age movement that unites all the different paths, and that is that the human race and nature have a symbiotic, mutualistic relationship that must remain in balance. That's a key word. So the New Age spirituality, it promotes the belief that the human spirit longs for equilibrium, an equilibrium that can only be achieved when one's spirit is aligned with nature. So religious beliefs may vary between Native American tribes, but again, there is a widespread panentheist belief in a great spirit who created the earth and who pervades everything. It's linked to animism, which is which sees kindred spirits in all things, including plants and animals. So therefore, Native Americans, like Chief Looking Horse, believe humans, again, have this synergistic relationship with nature. And if this balance of nature is lost, we will be facing a catastrophe of apocalyptic proportions. And in order to maintain this balance, sacrifices must be given back to nature before man can take of the land. So plans, in their mind, need to be made to ensure that resources are not depleted. And in many Native American cosmologies, actually, all of life was the result of the cosmic union between Mother Earth and Father Sky. So therefore, meddling with the future of other beings was a very serious business. And in fact, many rituals were performed before any hunting took place, and often sacrifices were made to be reclaimed by the powers of the sun. So this balance between nature and man needed to be carefully maintained. Native Americans actually, especially in the 19th century, believed that market-based capitalist economic systems of the European settlers led to social political power struggles in the late 19th century. And it was this that subsequently led to the imbalance of this relationship between man and nature.
And something to keep in mind, too, is that although, as you said, many Native Americans may hold this view, you don't have to be a Native American in order to hold this. And we're going to take a short break here in a moment. But when we come back, we're going to be talking more about this and how it ties in to the environmentalism that you hear actually a lot about. You probably hear a lot more about that than about the Native American views in particular. But how many people in your area have you heard of, or do you know, who are so focused on the earth and not being a steward of it, but actually worshiping it? And not looking to the book of Genesis, where Adam was made and was, had dominion over the land, but people who actually worship this earth in place of God, putting it at a higher level than God. That this earth needs to be our main focus, that we are the ultimate bearer of what happens to it and when, all of that stuff, completely taking God's sovereignty out of the equation and having an unhealthy focus on trying to save the earth, quote unquote, like that's in our complete control, which of course it's not, because God is sovereign, and according to his will, we see what happens throughout our lives and throughout history. And of course, as we look to the future, of course, this world isn't going to be destroyed because of people, but we read in the Bible itself, in God's word, what this world has in store. And because that is part of God's plan, this environmentalist movement, although recycling, of course, is good and stuff, definitely a lot of people out there have an unhealthy view of this. We're going to be talking about that more with Stephanie Potts when we come back from our break. We hope you are enjoying this show, and again, the unique content that we're bringing to you today. Please stay right where you are, and we'll be back in just a few minutes. Friends, welcome back to Colliding Worldviews. I'm here with Stephanie Potts, a missionary from Haven Ministries. We're talking about a very unique subject, again, a subject that we haven't talked about here before, the new age and how it's radicalizing Native American spirituality. If you have an unhealthy doctrine of God, if you don't understand who God is, then it's no surprise that you're going to believe that God is in everything. When you look at the trees, when you look at the ocean and rivers and all this other stuff, to believe, oh, God is in that, and I'm taking care of God or whatever else that belief entails. No, God is outside the universe. He created the universe. He created the space-time continuum. That which began to exist, God created. So guess what? If God is the earth, or God is the things that are in the earth, and that was created, then God would have had to create himself, which is logically impossible. So if you have an unhealthy doctrine of God, you fall into these type of lies. And I'm here with Stephanie Potts, again, talking about this lie and how it ties into Native American spirituality. Very important information that we presented before the break. Stephanie showed a video and also some pictures as well. And people need to be educated about this topic, like every other topic, as we're reaching people around us, wherever we happen to live, and sharing the gospel with them. Now, Stephanie, we talked about the apocalyptic cults. We talked about this ghost dance, and again, we showed the clothing as well. Um, what is the primary focus or goal of Native American apocalyptic cults?
Well, that's a good question. Um, so let's say, I'm just going to go back through my notes here a little bit. I think the overall goal, again, is this balance, this symbiotic mutual relationship that must remain between man and nature. And the New Age, again, promotes the belief that the human spirit longs for an equilibrium. This equilibrium can be achieved when one's spirit is aligned with nature. And so the Native Americans, they all have this common theme. They may have different religions within their different nations, but people like Chief Looking Horse believe that humans must have this synergistic relationship with nature in order to maintain life itself. And if we lose this balance of nature, we're going to be facing a catastrophe of apocalyptic proportions. And sacrifices must be given to back to nature before man can take of the land. And plans need to be made to ensure that these resources are not depleted.
And I wanted you to reiterate this because we have many viewers out there who may not have heard of this particular topic, but they are very aware of environmentalists who are in their area, who have what seems to be an unhealthy focus on the earth and resources and all this stuff, which obviously is a good thing to a particular degree. You know, it's good to have your green can and your blue can and your gray can when you're putting your trash out and recycling stuff and like that. But to have an unhealthy, again, overtly focused view on environmentalism, how does that tie into this? How does the relationship between the New Age movement and Native American apocalyptic cults influenced the environmental movement in general?
Well, that's a great question. So let's examine some of the writings that have been published out there. One article that I came across that I was really startled by was by a man named Mark Hertsgaard, who is the environmental correspondent and investigative editor for The Nation magazine. In his September 2017 article entitled "Climate Denialism is Literally Killing Us," he declares that climate change denial should be a crime, that murder is murder, and we should punish it as such. So Hertsgaard is actually just one of a growing number of people in the environmental movement that believe this way. And a lot of people have spoken out against this. Pascal Emmanuel Gobry of The Week magazine, he argues that environmentalism, it sometimes has a little bit of a whiff of a death cult. He says that it sometimes leans towards an anti-human worldview and one that views the earth goddess as the valuable life form and humans as parasites. So it really devalues human life. And it sometimes feels like more of a fundamentalist religion than anything else. So, and I want to also make sure it's clear that not everybody in the New Age believes this, but it is a very much of a common theme in the more radical elements of it. And what's interesting is that this New Age goddess movement, which is also known as Wicca, appears to be the fastest growing religion in America, unfortunately. This is according to the Atlantic magazine. And Wicca and Native American spirituality have very similar beliefs about the relationship shared between humans and nature. So this is adding a lot more potential recruits to this ever-growing environmental death cult. And Brandon O'Neill of the online magazine Spiked, he argues that environmentalism is by far the most influential death cult in existence today. It's in calculating in the masses, the idea that the end of the world is near. Again, this apocalyptic mentality that we should be punished for our sins that penance is our earthly duty, and that anyone who says or thinks otherwise is a heretic or a denier who should be held up to ridicule. So there's a variety of different types of movements out there. One movement is called the Rainbow Warrior Movement. And it's an example of how people in the New Age are uniting for the environment. And the members of this movement believe that the movement is actually the fulfillment of another Native American prophecy called the Rainbow Tribe Prophecy. And this prophecy is actually not only within the Native American community, but it's shared by lots of different people groups around the world. So this prophecy are similar. The prophecies around the world are similar in noting that people will gather in Western lands, that they would be comprised of people made up of 4 races, and they will all come together to consolidate the total knowledge of the humanity as one. This is an example of a Rainbow Warrior movement that occurred in Europe a few years ago. That picture that you're seeing on your screen right now. And so we're actually seeing the fulfillment of this prophecy, as they believe so, with politicians, environmental groups, civil rights groups like Lives Matter, and indigenous leaders from the Amazon basin of South America to Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders and Green Party presidential candidate Jill Stein, all coming to Standing Rock to support the efforts to fight against, the environmental incursions that are being made there. So many races from all over the world, from the 4 corners of the world, coming together to fight against this. So in their mind, this is evidence of the truth of their religion, of this Rainbow Tribe prophecy.
Now, Stephanie, do all Native Americans appreciate what the New Age movement is doing in regard to the environment?
I kind of grin at this because, no. Native American fundamentalists look at New Age, a lot of the New Age movement, as what they refer to as culture side. It's a term that was coined in the Indian country to mean the systematic destroying of cultural values based on ethnicity, religion, political beliefs, social status, and other particularities. And in fact, in the 1993 international gathering of the U.S. and Canadian Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota nations, there were about 500 representatives there from 40 different tribes and bands of the Lakota, and they unanimously passed a declaration of war against exploiters of the Lakota spirituality, and especially this Rainbow Warrior movement. One thing to keep in mind is that in contrast to the New Age, which is very syncretistic, meaning that there's lots of different paths to God in the New Age, Native Americans view the right religion for them is, again, based upon their nationality. It's not upon whatever works for you. So a lot of Lakota Sioux hate this Rainbow Warrior movement referred to, earlier, and because every year this Rainbow Family of Light group has a love fest gathering in the Black Hills of South Dakota. And when they meet, they end up just desecrating everything with 5,000 to 20,000 hippies who end up just digging trench latrines and fire pits and kitchens, and they just kind of leave trash all over the place. But unfortunately, these folks in the Rainbow Warrior movement see themselves as Native Americans, despite not understanding anything about Native American faith.
And what New Age groups are working directly with Native Americans in the environmental fight?
Well, the Rainbow Warrior movement is just one example of how the New Age movement is hijacking Native American prophecies. But they're just a bunch of ragtag hippies, so I'm not necessarily overly concerned about them. I think what should be of more interest to Christians, rather, is the more mainstream organizations who legitimately study and practice under Native American religious leaders. And that these groups include organizations like the Center for Planetary Culture and the Theosophical Society. Now, unlike Hertzgaard, who says that everything that these people do, should be considered murder and should be treated as such. I will say that the Center for Planetary Culture and the Theosophical Society are not as openly visceral in their disdain for climate change deniers, but their philosophy is certainly contributing to the power of the global environmental death cult. They are certainly giving a new religious perspective to the scientific analyses of man's supposed impact on the environment. And let's not forget, many of the first scientists like Kepler and Newton and Bacon, they were all strong Christians and looked at science and human life through the lens of the Bible. But in the late 19th and 20th centuries, however, more materialist philosophies were applied to science and led to a subsequent devaluation of human life, again, looking at humans as parasites. And since the 1960s, especially the counterculture movement and its associated spirituality has become more influential in society's view of the environment and in government legislation. So another interesting person is Daniel Pinchbeck, who is the founder of the Center for Planetary Culture. He's a perfect example of this transition in philosophical perspectives. Pinchbeck's parents were actually deeply rooted in the New York counterculture movement of the 50s and 60s, and he actually routinely takes the psychedelic tryptamine brew, I'm going to butcher this, ayahuasca, as part of his religious rituals. Ayahuasca, which originates from the Amazon basin, has similar properties to native peyote, and it's primarily used to enter into an altered state of consciousness and to reach, again, the spiritual world for esoteric knowledge. But it can cause vicious bouts of vomiting, diarrhea, delirium, and it definitely makes one more susceptible to confusion and hallucinations. But in Pinchbeck's mind, the materialism of the 19th and 20th century actually caused the world to forfeit what he says intuitive aspects of its being, thereby suggesting that ayahuasca is the ultimate pathway to gnosis or knowledge. And so Pinchbeck has written for many different publications, including Esquire magazine, the New York Times magazine, the Village Voice, Rolling Stone, and in 1994 he was chosen by the New York Times magazine as one of 30 under 30 destined to change our culture through his literary magazine, Pinchbeck's magazine, Open City. So in addition to all this, he has written a lot of influential books, such as 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl, which chronicles Mayan and Hopi Indian prophecies. He's very much into Native American prophecies, and what's interesting about Hopi Indian prophecy is that they believe that we have suffered 3 previous world cataclysms. Once that was destroyed by fire, another by ice, and then one by a tremendous deluge of water. Sounds more like the global flood to me, but and that these 3 global destructions were not the result of merely random earth changes or astrophysical phenomena, but of humankind's disregard for Mother Earth and for the spiritual dictates of the Creator. So this would suggest that the Hopi Indians and those that believe in their prophecies do not view the cyclical behavior of global temperature as a natural phenomenon. And what's really interesting is that Assistant Secretary of the United Nations, Robert Mueller, was considered an elder of the Hopi Nation before his death in 2010. And Mueller was the first to allow a Native American nation, the Hopi Nation, to speak at the United Nations. And he actually used their prophecies as an apologetic to further his agenda of religious environmentalism.
Wow. And please tell us about the Theosophical Society and what they believe.
Okay, so I'm really glad you asked this question, Tony, because it's vital to understand Mueller's religious background in theosophy in order to understand his philosophical reasons for embracing the Hopi Indian prophecies. So theosophy is a religion and a form of Western esotericism. It was established in the United States during the late 19th century by a Russian woman named Helena Blavatsky, and it draws on beliefs largely from Blavatsky's writings. Alice Bailey was one of the most influential members of Blavatsky's Theosophical Society, and she also greatly influenced Muller, and Muller used a lot of her writings in his own writings. But the cosmic Christ that Alice Bailey refers to is certainly not the Christ of the Bible. And in fact, those familiar with Alice Bailey's work know that her books were actually channeled by through a spirit guide, a Tibetan spirit guide named Djwhal Khul. So Muller was known by some as the philosopher of the United Nations, and based his global education and world core curriculum, or Common Core, initiatives on the teachings set forth in the books of Alice Bailey, all of which were channeled from spirit guides. Who knows who those spirits really are? And so they would soon appear to lead the world into the age of Aquarius, and it's the task of Alice Bailey's disciples to prepare the way for what Buddhists believe is this world teacher. It's the Buddha of the future and the Jesus of the past, this Maitreya character, and that's who Muller really was focusing a lot of his attention on. So Muller used a lot of different things in his beliefs. He grew up Catholic, but he ended up using a lot of mystical practices that go on in mystical Catholic churches, like contemplative prayer. But so much of his beliefs were based upon theosophy, all of which were channeled from spirit guides. And he had more in common, really, with the religious beliefs of the Hopi Indians than he really did ever with mainline Christianity, despite the fact that he grew up Catholic.
In other words, theosophy is something our viewers need to look up to learn more about. Sounds like theology, sounds like philosophy. It's theosophy, Theosophy. But how have Native American apocalyptic cults changed since the late 19th century? And what role do international organizations like the UN, of course, United Nations, play in changing the global culture regarding environmentalism?
So radicalized Native American apocalyptic cults in the late 19th century, they were primarily focused on eradicating the white man. However, by the 20th century, the fusion of Native American spirituality with Buddhism under this umbrella of the New Age has caused Native American millenarianism to evolve into a global environmental death cult that calls on the eradication of climate change deniers. These two religions are actually considered earth religions and are united around this belief that God permeates nature, with humanity being an integral part of nature. So luckily, globalist organizations like the United Nations, they don't have the power to enforce worldwide climate change regulations as yet, but this is most likely because they do not control global currency. But one thing that a lot of people don't know is that, as Marxist groups such as Antifa, as they gain more and more influence within the counterculture, I personally believe we can expect to see an eco-Marxist power base building to build up within this environmentalist death cult. And interestingly, until quite recently, there was this common myth that Marx and Engels had nothing to say about the environment. But when you examine the historical documents, this isn't the case. And in Marx's 1844 economic and philosophical manuscripts, he writes, "Man lives on nature. This means that nature is his body, which he must remain in continuous interchange if he is not to die. That man's physical and spiritual life is linked to nature means simply that nature is linked to itself, for man is part of nature." So Marx was already very much embracive of this religious environmentalism. Now, obviously, we have a lot of growing nationalism in the world today, but as the economy continues to improve, we often get very complacent. So we need to be aware of growing eco-Marxist groups that are out there and how they work with this global green agenda.
And there are definitely a lot of individuals out there who do focus on this. And of course, again, it's just a distraction from the truth of that we find in the Bible, distraction from the Lord Jesus Christ, and who is completely in control of this world. It's not like the Bible says this particular thing is going to happen in the future, and God's plan needs to change now because people didn't steward the earth good enough or anything like that. God is the sovereign one here, and we can look to God's word to know what the future has in store for us. Now, of course, this is, as you've said, this is not a new thing, quote unquote, and this is something that the media and even Hollywood has pushed as well. Stephanie, what this makes me think about is that movie that came out like 25 years ago with Steven Seagal called On Deadly Ground, because in that movie he plays like an environmentalist, and they're Native Americans in that movie. In the very end of the movie, he's giving this public speaking presentation talking about big oil and all these different environmental factors that are destroying the earth. And it's totally from this Native American type view. So anyway, if our viewers haven't seen that movie, you might want to go check that out, because that'll tie right in.
I don't think I've ever even seen that. That's interesting. I'll have to get that one.
It's called On Deadly Ground again. About 25 years old or so. But anyway, it does line up with what you're saying here. We only have a few minutes left. I do want to equip our audience as well, because again, whether they see this movie or not, whether they are around a lot of Native Americans or not, and whether or not they know people who are die-hard environmentalists, focusing their whole life on that. Again, an unhealthy, overly focused view, taking them away from who God truly is and his nature and all of that. How should Christians witness to people who are associated with Native American apocalyptic cults, and also to people in the New Age movement?
So when we witness to Native Americans and those who are involved in the New Age movement, we must emphasize that God did not create Mother Earth. Therefore, the earth should not be worshipped. Earth-based spirituality is the very antithesis of the world fashioned for us by a loving creator. And James said in his passage in James 3:15, this wisdom, or this focus on earth religions, it descendeth not from above, but is earthly, it's sensual, it's devilish. So James was obviously very concerned about these false religions developing, and unfortunately, I am greatly concerned about this, because this global peace plan initiated by this environmentalist death cult will eventually set up a religion for the Antichrist. And in light of this, we must always remember the warning that Apostle Paul gave us in his letter to the Thessalonians. Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day of Jesus' second coming will not come unless the falling away from the faith and belief in Jesus comes first. So it's highly likely, in my opinion, that we're seeing this great falling away today. And so therefore, Christians must be prepared to not only answer for the hope that is within them, but why they can't support this global green agenda.
And this is a particular group who you as Christians out there may be led to focus on as far as sharing the gospel with them and reaching them. Of course, we have many Christians out there who are focused on reaching Muslims, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, the New Age, but also just look to the people around you who, again, have this over-the-top focus on environmentalism to the point to where they're pretty much worshiping the earth rather than God, or believing that the earth and all that is in it is God, or that God is in all that we have around us in nature. Again, a false view, one more distraction from the truth. And this may be a group that you want to focus on and share the gospel with. But if nothing else, at least be informed about it to whatever degree even this particular episode has taken you to, and be familiar with it to bring this up to other Christians as well, because other Christians know people who you don't know. And of course, all of us need to get out there and share the gospel with everyone. Stephanie, it's been a blessing to have you here once again. Thank you so much. I want to encourage people to go to havenministry.com/missionaries/Stephanie-Potts. They can find your page there and follow your work. And again, Stephanie's been here on the Trinity channel before. She's also been on Rasha Christie's Truth Matters. You can find other videos with her. Stephanie, thank you so much for being here. God bless you and all the work that you do.
Thanks so much, Tony.
Friends, think about this topic. This is something that, again, we have not talked about here on the Trinity channel before, but it is a vital topic nonetheless to be informed about, because this is one more worldview that collides with the truth. The Christian worldview, which makes the most sense of reality. Yes, Christianity is what has the evidence to back it up, and this worldview that Stephanie talked about is one more false one, and it's not an overtly religious group per se. When you think about religious groups like Islam and Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, Buddhism, Hinduism, and of course the list goes on. But to have this loyalty to it and this religious type of belief when it comes to it is making it into a religion in and of itself. To whatever degree that is. So again, very important to be knowledgeable about this and to be prepared to talk about it with people around you. We want to encourage you to continue to share the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ with all people, because whether they consider themselves religious, just spiritual, not religious, it doesn't matter. They still need the truth. And of course, Jesus Christ said he is the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through him. So, continue to learn more about this topic as well as others. Get better equipped to share the gospel with people around you and defend the historic Christian faith whenever that opportunity arises. I encourage you to go out and do that, to love your neighbors enough to share the truth with them, the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ. And we will see you next time here on Colliding Worldviews, found only on ABN's Trinity channel.